everyone. My name is Rob Benner from Transportation for America. I want to thank all of you for joining us today on our webinar about year 2 of the Smart Cities Collaborative. We finished up the first year of our effort last November and are incredibly excited to launch the second year with applications now open. I have here Russ Brooks, our Smart Cities Director, to talk a little bit more about the first year of the collaborative and what we're planning for year 2. And throughout this process, we will be taking questions for answering at the end. So please go ahead and submit any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end of this presentation. Russ, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. As Rob mentioned, we ran the first year of the Smart Cities Collaborative last year. The Collaborative is a learning and support network that provided direct technical assistance to leading-edge cities advancing smart mobility policies and projects. And we really started the Collaborative last year in response to the U.S. Department of Transportation's Smart City Challenge, which provided $50 million to a winning city, which turned out to be Columbus, Ohio. But really, a lot of cities in our network through that process reached out to us and asked for help with their applications. And really, out of that, what Rob and I realized is that while it was great that Columbus won $50 million and that they have been pushing forward with their smart city projects, there were still a lot of cities that were interested in moving forward with their proposals, that they were still meeting as working groups in their communities, and that there was really a lot of excitement around how to push forward in smart cities. And so last year, as part of that process, as I mentioned, Rob and I talked with about 60 of the cities that 60 of the 78 cities that had applied to the Smart City Challenge. We heard a lot of concurrent themes, and just like this year, we opened up the application process last year. We had about 60 cities apply, and we had offered them an opportunity to really tell us what they were interested in working on. And what we heard from them was that there was a lot of desire to learn more and to work around automated vehicles, to work around shared mobility and new mobility options, and to talk more about data, this big data as well as data analytics and such. And so that's how we framed things in the first year, was kind of this broad statement of harnessing transformational technologies and new mobility options in service of your long-term outcomes. And we really had some wonderful cities that joined us. We selected 16 cities, which were from across the country and really of all sizes. Our smallest city was Lone Tree, Colorado, which has about 10,000 people in it. Our largest city was Los Angeles, which the city alone is about 4 million. And the idea was to get a broad range of cities from around the country that were interested in working on different projects in the smart mobility space. But we really had tangible outcomes. That was the other thing that we wanted last year, was we wanted cities to open source their experience. We wanted them to share. That was the number one thing we wanted out of the collaborative. We wanted them to develop and introduce policy in their agency or in their council, and we wanted them to become pilot ready or launch a pilot project. So that was really the focus of last year. And really, as we started moving throughout the year, we brought the cities together 4 times. We brought them together in Minneapolis and in Washington, D.C., and in Miami, and finally again in Los Angeles. We also held quarterly phone calls interspersed in between those meetings to cover more subject areas, to share kind of common challenges and things that cities were working on. So that was really kind of our experience in year 1. And so we're just going to take a second here. We've got a few of our members on film just to give you an idea of kind of what their reactions were.
Smart Cities Collaborative is a great opportunity for cities to work together, share their thinking and develop solutions that can help each other.
Having technology work for the people and have the people work for technology, and learning what other cities are doing and bouncing ideas, to make sure that we're on the right track.
There are a ton of awesome pilots that are going on in this area right now, and really being able to, one, share the results that we're getting, but two, hear the results that everybody else is getting. How are ours similar? How are they different?
It really made sense for us to look beyond just our own backyard and look and see what's happening across the country.
We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn from them too. We want to share our ideas with them as well. So we've learned a lot of things in the earlier meeting that we had up in Minneapolis and this one, and we're looking forward to the next one.
This area is going to change everything about how we live and work, and no one quite knows what that impact will be. It's a pretty big revolution, and having this brain trust of cities get together and experts really just adds a tremendous amount of value as we embark on this. And frankly, I think we're all going to be stronger together and benefit from the thinking if we work together rather than all trying the same things and not sharing.
So that is just a real quick look at kind of some of the feedback that we got last year. I think we had a number of really great cities that participated, that pushed projects forward. You heard from Los Angeles, you heard from Portland, you heard from San Jose and Miami. All of them have been working on pilot projects either in the shared mobility or the automated vehicle space. And when we closed our meeting last month or in November in Los Angeles, Rob and I really sat down and tried to take a look back at the year and assess what did we do well, what could we improve on, what were the things that cities were struggling with, and I think a few things emerged for us. The first was that the cities really did a great job of coming together, of developing relationships, and really thinking of each other as extensions on their own teams, that when they were struggling with challenges, that they would pick up the phone and call their colleagues in other places. So we're really happy to see that. The second was that very quickly our idea about having separate working groups around automation and around shared mobility and data pretty quickly changed after about the second meeting. That what we were seeing was that cities were most interested in tackling those challenges that really presented themselves across projects, that they weren't necessarily exclusive to an automation or an automated vehicle project or a shared mobility project, but that were things like the impact on road and curb space, or how to develop performance measures for new mobility modes, or how to develop private sector agreements that really work for the city. So when Rob and I took a look back and thought about those things, what we heard was a theme that emerged for year two that was really how these new mobility models, how emerging technologies were reshaping the right-of-way and curb space. And so as we started to dive into that a little bit deeper, we really started to think about it in four distinct areas. The first is design, the second is measure, the third is manage, and the fourth is price. And so I'll dive a little deeper into those. So design, there have been a lot of design implications from new mobility modes, that there has been a fair amount of work over the last few years for cities and nonprofits and others looking at how do you include bike share in our network? How do you include bus rapid transit? How do you think about electrification infrastructure? But no one has really taken a step back and thought about all the different modes, all the different users and use cases, and started to think really holistically about how road and curb space needs to change. And so we'll be taking a look at that this year, how road and curb space are going to change. We're going to look at all the different use cases, everything from electrification infrastructure to urban delivery and mobile vendors, to transit and automation, but we're also going to think about this in the context of Vision Zero and complete streets and making sure that these roads serve every use, but more importantly, every user. So we'll take a look at that through the design this year. We'll also, as we think about measuring, the old adage is you can't manage what you can't measure. And so we're going to continue to look at real-time data. We're going to look at performance measures. We're going to start to talk about developing new metrics and performance measures for new mobility options and things like curb space utilization, for which there isn't much today. But we're also going to talk about data collection and analysis. Big data is continuing to sweep over cities, and we'll talk about what that looks like. We'll also talk about third-party data aggregation platforms, like what's happening in Seattle and with the Shared Streets platform. And lastly, we hope to develop these new measures in concert with all the cities that participate, specifically, and start to begin to standardize some of these measures across cities so that we can start to compare Nashville with Los Angeles and with other places equally. We're going to talk about management and think of this in the broad sense of the word. We're going to talk about both managing the relationships with the private sector, so this is where public-private partnerships and developing agreements and that will fall. But we're also going to talk about managing these private mobility providers, which are playing a growing role in our cities, in concert with our transit systems to make sure that they augment and complement transit. We're going to talk about curb management strategies. With all the new designs and the new modes, it requires new curb management strategies. And we're also going to touch upon some of the organizational changes that cities are going through in order to better manage their road and curb space. So that's kind of what we'll do in the managed category. And lastly, but certainly not least, we're going to talk about pricing. Certainly New York has been making strides this year on a congestion pricing plan. There have been successful implementation of plans in London and in Stockholm and in Singapore. So we're going to talk about congestion and roadway pricing. But we're also going to talk about dynamic parking and curb space pricing. We'll talk about new strategy. As part of the new curb management strategies, we'll talk about things like curb utilization fees. And we'll also, in context, talk about the political, technological, and messaging strategies. So physically, operationally, how are we going to accomplish it? What are the political hurdles that these cities and others have experienced? And we'll also talk about messaging as part of both curb space and roadway pricing. Those are really the topics that we're going to dive into this year. I'm just going to kind of pause there and let people ask questions. But I will say that the application process is open today. Can be found on our website. The URL is right there. You will get an email after the webinar today that has this information in it, but the applications are due Friday, February 16th. And if you have any other questions after today's webinar or you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to Rob or I at smartcities@t4america.org, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. So I'm just going to pause there for a minute and allow any questions from the participants. All right, so I do see a question about rural cities. We did not have any cities that I would consider to be rural cities this year. We had a couple of suburban communities. We are interested in getting applications and have been reaching out to a number of smaller and ex-urban and rural communities this year. So if you're in one of those communities, please don't hesitate to apply. We have another question about the financial obligation. There is a fee to participate in the collaborative, just like there was last year. The fee this year is $7,500 per person. That fee covers both the overall collaborative fee to participate, but it also includes all of the travel expenses related to participating in each of the 4 meetings this year. Which reminds me, I should bring up, we will be having, again this year, 4 meetings. April, June, September, and November is when we're targeting for our meetings. We don't have our cities locked in just yet, but we always do them in one of our participant cities. So I expect in the next 2 weeks when applications come in, we'll lock in those locations, and we'll certainly share those with people. We have another question about can the application be a joint application, meaning between 2 cities? Absolutely. We had a number of kind of regional gatherings or partnerships that joined this year, and we always encourage more than one agency or department in a region. So, for example, in Nashville, both the city county, the MPO, and the transit agency all participated last year. In Los Angeles, it was both the DOT and the transit agency. In Sacramento, I think it was just about every level of government. It was the city and the MPO and others. So definitely, we only ask that those cities be physically or geographically close together and that they're actually working in partnership. We have another question of which projects were piloted or implemented in year one. We had a number of projects, a number of cities that moved projects forward. Seattle, for example, has been working on their mobility as a service platform, their mobility hubs, and the Trusted Data Collaborative that I mentioned earlier. Los Angeles has been working on a microtransit pilot that just went through the RFP stage and is about to start going to the operational phase. I think they're in the contract stage right now. San Jose is doing an automated vehicle project. Austin has been doing automated and connected vehicle projects. Miami has been working on a microtransit pilot. So those are just some of the pilots that cities have been working on as part of this. We had a question. You indicated you analyzed what went well last year and what didn't go well. Can you please elaborate on your assessment? Sure. So when we think about, as I mentioned, kind of thematically, when we carved things up into separated working groups, that was one thing that we didn't design very well. I think much like a lot of the cities last year, we were also testing and trying new things. And as we went through the process, as I mentioned, a lot of the topical areas and the issues that cities wanted to discuss were really those things that cut across projects. I also think that Rob and I certainly learned a lot in terms of managing the meetings and how we format them. I think one of the things that we want to do a better job of this year is getting out of the building, getting our hands on more tangible examples of success in the different communities. At our last meeting in LA, we brought in, or we partnered with TransDev, and they had a demonstration of one of their vehicles. We'd like to do a little bit more of that in our partner cities. I think we also are moving, instead of having quarterly calls that were interspersed in between the meetings, this year we're going to have monthly calls. We'd like to do a better job of keeping the conversation going between the in-person meetings, but we'd also like to use that as an opportunity for the cities to share specifically more about their projects and to give updates that will help inform the content for each of the in-person meetings, allowing us to kind of dive deeper in and tackle those issues. So those are some of the things that Rob and I really identified. I think we also, much like the cities, have a much stronger idea of what cities are working on and what they're struggling with. What we've heard from the cities this year is that they are much clearer on their projects and what their goals are, that they have more funding and dedication not dedication from staff, but more dedicated staff that are working and tackling on these issues. I think cities have kind of figured out a little bit more where their place is and what they want to work on, and so I think we'll see that reflected this year. We had a question, do you have to be a transportation tech AV expert to join? What level of knowledge is required? We had people from up and down the spectrum that participated this year. We had everyone from specific project managers to assistant directors and directors of transportation. So we had a pretty broad swath. I think the answer to that question is really, we want you to be engaged in a project or to be doing this work within your community. I like to joke that we are working groups, that we're not talking groups. So we are tangibly working on projects and crowdsourcing solutions and developing those shared solutions between cities. So that's kind of our only requirement. So Someone else asked, what key elements are we seeking in the selected applications? Unfortunately, there is no right answer. So we ask a number of questions in the application. I think there's 5. It's a pretty simple application. It is really for us a statement of intention. It is a conversation starter for us to discuss these with each of the cities and their applications. But what we're really looking for is to get a sense of what you want to work on, what are the outcomes you'd like to see from joining the collaborative, what is the help that you think you need. We'd also like to get a sense of where your community is and where your leadership is. Are they supporting it? Is it a project that is funded or is in planning or is in operations? So there really is no right answer to that. So another question of, do you have to deploy a project during the collaborative or just move to a position to be ready to deploy? I think that's an excellent question. We had cities across the spectrum last year. We had cities that brought projects that were in the operational stage into the collaborative, like Centennial, Colorado, and their LIFT pilot that was focused on senior access to transit. But we also had a number of cities that were in the planning stage. And as I just mentioned, LA Metro is a good example of a city that had an idea of what they wanted to do, and they worked through their process to design and scope the pilot, to put an RFP out and they're going through contract now, and they're hoping to deploy in 2018. So I would say that we just want you to have a solid idea of what you'd like to work on and the progress that you'd like to make. Ideally, we'd like to get you to be pilot ready by the end of the 12 months. But like I said, people are at all different stages, which candidly I think actually adds to the richness of the collaborative, as some people are going through it, some people have been through it, some people are about to go through it, so on and so forth. I had another question here. Will we be sending the presentation out by email? We will after this, along with a recording. We had another question of, do you anticipate going to year 3 if we aren't quite ready for a project in year 2? I think I would just go back to my last answer and say that certainly we want to do our best to get you to a place to be pilot ready throughout this year, but if that moves into 2019, that's okay. We have a lot of cities that are in that place right now where they spent 2018 planning and determining funding and scoping out their projects, and they're moving forward in 2019. We have a lot of communities that we anticipate will be returning from last year, so this isn't necessarily a one-off 12-month thing. I think most of our cities will be participating again next year. We have another question of, most of the projects are sounding more urban than suburban. Can you tell me how a suburban community participated? Sure. So I think most of our communities were urban last year. Our 2 suburban communities were Centennial and Lone Tree in Colorado. Centennial's project was particularly focused on senior access and first mile, last mile connectivity to transit. Lone Tree, Colorado was joined in preparation for a new light rail station that is actually opening up in 2019. And they wanted to create an on-demand pilot. They currently have a circulator system in their core, and they wanted to change that over to an on-demand system. So their pilot project is again focused on transit connectivity, specifically focused on the university and the employers that are based there. And they, I think, had 4 circulator buses, and they've now converted 1 through a partnership with Uber to be an on-demand or demand-responsive pilot. I think I talked to Seth last week, and they are getting ready to do a second bus that they want to begin to transition all 4. So the second half of that question is, can the project be something that we are considering or researching but are not sure about implementation? Absolutely. That's the whole point, is to test and learn, and to begin to think about, to come into the collaborative, think about your project, work with other cities, learn from their experience, share your challenges with them, but also to get a better understanding of how that project is actually going to be implemented in your community, and that may entail changing some or all of it. And we certainly had a number of cities pivot over the course of the year, refine, iterate, pivot their projects as they learned and dived a bit deeper. We have another question. Does this webinar address best practices from past applications, or is it mostly on the process itself? Yeah, I don't know that we have best practices from last year. As I mentioned, there's no right answer for the application process. Like I said, the application is really an indication of interest and a conversation starter for Rob and I to follow up with you. We're really looking for a better understanding of what you want to accomplish, what things you think you need help with, and what kind of outcomes you're really looking to drive with these projects. So that would be my suggestion. Another question of how many jurisdiction agencies will be accepted. I don't have an answer for that. Last year we had 16 cities, we had 32 agencies, and we had roughly 52 people that participated. I think our number will be closer to 60 participants this year. I think my goal is to get at least 20 cities as part of that. And so there's no hard number in the sand. It largely comes down to at what point do Rob and I feel like we can't manage the group effectively and provide a positive, constructive experience for everyone. Would implementation of a broadband network in the streets be an eligible project? I think so. I think we'd love to talk with you a little bit more about it. I think that wireless and the infrastructure related to that are having a huge impact on cities, are having a huge impact on the right-of-way, and are a core component to any smart city or smart mobility program. So we'd be happy to talk more about that.
That looks like that's it for the questions that we have. We'll give it a few more seconds to see if anybody has any final questions for us.
Any other questions from anybody? We're happy to answer. Okay, hearing none, we will just close things out by saying that we really appreciate all of you joining us today. We're really looking forward to another year in the collaborative and hope that you all apply. If you have more questions or something occurs to you after we get off the line, don't hesitate to reach out to Rob or I at either of the emails listed there. We also will be sending out a recording of this webinar afterward. But again, if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out, and we look forward to seeing all your applications.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Please stand by.